Thank you, welcome, and without further ado, I will turn it over to Ali to begin today's session. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily, and hello, everyone. So I'll start by introducing the information management series that we have started, if you have read the flyer. So I'm just trying to hide. Okay, here we go. Perfect. So the series of objectives is to have a good understanding of the aspects of information management and recognize its importance, have an overview of the essential information gathered in emergencies and how to govern those information, have a thorough understanding of event-based surveillance, outline of the information products expected from the EOC, better understanding on how to analyze and use and manage those information, and finally have a good impression on the requirement for an EOC information system. So to reach those objectives, we divided those objectives into upcoming webinars. So these are the upcoming webinars. So the first one is today's, which is Introduction to Information Management. Next week will be presented by Dr. Ramesh, where he will present the governance of data. So basically the SOPs needed for good governance, the data sensitivity, the sharing protocol, accountability, and so on. The following week we'll have data and information needed by the EOC. So event data, response data, contextual data, and how they are different between each kind of hazard, because in the EOC you're having, for example, earthquakes, floods, outbreaks, and each of those hazards have different required information. The following week we have event-based surveillance. So the watch mode, what is event-based surveillance, sources of information and signals, the essential elements of information, the critical information requirements, how to manage signals, all of these things related to event-based surveillance. Then we'll have products and analysis and decision making. So what are the expected outputs and products from an EOC? So basically spot reps, situation reports, maybe incident action plan, and so on, and how to use those collected outputs and how to have good analysis for decision making. Then we have information systems. So you would want to understand what is the software requirements and what is the importance and limitations of having a software solution. And we might demo some software solution that you can use for your EOC. And the final webinar is other areas. We have some ideas. For example, it can be big data, data mining, machine learning, or maybe ideas from you, the community, from Discord that we can add. So what is information management? But let's go back to the webinars, because when you finish those webinar series, we will also send quizzes for each webinar. And once you pass all the quizzes in this series, then you qualify to have a certificate from the African CDC, the PHE England, the UK, and the CDC America, WHO, and so on. And all of the partners. I'm sorry if I forgot any partner. And you can attend the quiz multiple times. You need to pass the quiz, and you can have multiple attempts for the quiz. And you can, if you missed this webinar, you can watch it again and then attempt the quiz. If you have a colleague that have missed this webinar and is interested to join the series, please share the Discord link where he can have access to all the recorded webinars and to the quiz links. So today's topic is information management, and we already, Dr. Ngoy a few weeks ago had a really good presentation on this topic, but today is just a summary to understand, introduction to understand what is information management, and just have a quick overview of what to expect. So information management is the management of data, information, and knowledge derived from those data and information. So you start with data, then you go to information, and then you have knowledge. So data is the lowest form is an unstructured facts and figures. They relay something specific, but they are not organized. So it's just data. Information, on the other hand, once we add meaning to the data, we have information. So information is data that have been organized, condensed, contextualized. There's context now. It's categorized. Maybe it's calculated too. So this information has a direction, it has a purpose, it has a story, and it conveys something specific. So this is information. But then you need to produce knowledge. And this knowledge is basically a deeper level of understanding and know-how. And it mostly depends on the experience of the staff in the EOC. So just to give a quick example, here we have a set of numbers. So we have 16, 1, we have Aiden, we have a set of names, Mazen, Ahmed, George, Rami, and a picture. So this is actually a set of data, but without context, you can't assume, you can't produce anything. So you need context and you need more story behind this information. So this data. So to convert it into information, we will add the context. So I'll tell you that, okay, this is actually data being collected by the event-based surveillance in the EUC. And this is data about the dengue cases in Aden. So we have 16 suspected cases. We have 1 fatality, and it's in Aden, the city. And those are the names of the suspected cases. And this person is the person that have passed away. So now we have some context, we have some information. So now this data is information. Okay, so what's next? What do we do with this information? Well, we need to produce knowledge. So what is knowledge? To produce knowledge, there is 2 different ways. There's many, but I will just discuss 2 different ways. So in a perfect scenario, you would produce knowledge from a set of rules. So information becomes knowledge when we apply rules to them. So if you remember the critical information requirements from the previous webinars, so those are in the event-based surveillance, for example, and they did some good risk profiling, and they said in the case of dengue and Aden, any case below 20, so here's only 16 cases, so below 20, the EUC does not need to react to this event. But if the cases reach 20, then we need to react. So this is knowledge. They know that as long as the cases are under 20, they don't need to react because they have, based on previous experience and based on previous studies and the risk profiling, they reached the conclusion that Aden is able to take care of itself if the cases are under 20, but above 20, they need to react. So this is knowledge. But that's in a perfect scenario. But in many EUCs, for example, they don't have all the critical information requirements for all sets of scenarios. So they will need to rely on experiences of their own staff. So their own staff will produce this knowledge based on their previous experience and understanding of the context of Aden and its capacity. They will understand that 20 is low and below 20 is fine, above 20 is not fine. So this is data, information, and the knowledge. Data, information, and the knowledge. But I just want to talk more about knowledge. And Dr. Edward Deming, in his book, he describes knowledge into 2 things. He says that knowledge should be predictive and knowledge should be based on a theory. So predictive as in, I can predict the future. So if you have an apple and you throw it, it will fall eventually. So that's a prediction. And information on itself doesn't predict anything, but knowledge does predict based on theory that you have. Your prediction is as good as the latest theory that you have or the latest example. And to give just a view, an example of what he means, he had a story in his book, The New Economics, about this rooster. So every morning, this rooster would wake up and he would crow loudly and flaps his wing, and the sun will set up. And he came up with this theory, the rooster, that every morning I would crow, and because of that, the sun will rise. So that's his theory, that's his knowledge, and that's based on his experience. And he has done this all of his life. But one day he overslept, and when he woke up, he found out that although he didn't crow, the sun has risen. So now he developed a new theory, although he was sad, that actually heat has no effect on the sun. So his new theory now, his new knowledge is he has no effect on the sun. So turning has actually taken place because of the first crazy theory, but he actually learned something because of that theory. And the second takeaway is your theory or prediction is as good as your latest theory, and those theories change all the time. So you need to be prepared that based on your experiences, you will produce new knowledge and new theories. Before I go to information management, I'll leave you with this picture. Okay. So why do you need information management? So information management is good, is needed to produce informed decision making. It also saves time because the majority of the time wasted from your employees is searching for information. If you have good information management, then they will find the information much faster. It makes your response agile, and based on the previous points, it reduces the costs. There's more points, but those are the main. It's also important to differentiate between information management and information systems. So we all know information systems. It's the technology, it's the software and hardware, it's the structured data. So information systems is actually only one part of information management, but information management is much more. Information management is the concept. So what are you collecting and why? It has unstructured content. So basically data from surveillance systems, from email, from media, from reports, from all of these data. And then a strategy to manage all of these data and information and how to deliver it to who needs it and so on. So in other words, information management is the art of collecting unstructured content based on the concept set, following the strategy, and while using the available information system to convert those unstructured content into structured data, information, and knowledge. So if you think about an old organization, they will have an old concept and they will have an old strategy. So basically their processes, every process you would need to go through 5 different approvals and so on. So to solve their problems, they adopted new technology, but they didn't actually change their operations, their strategy and their concept. So what do you think the result would be? They will just become an expensive old organization. Nothing will change. The software will not be compatible with their old processes. If it was compatible, then it will be complicated and expensive and it will solve nothing. So you really need to change your strategy. You need to modernize it, minimize it, make it easier. So a good information management is born out of good culture. So we know that when we think about information management, we basically think about the data and the technology used to collect this data. But we don't think much about the operation, the processes, and the leadership. And for good information management, you need leadership that is engaged, that have a vision, that have a strategy, that make key decisions, that has smoother emergency, to create smoother emergency management. And we talked about this in the previous webinars. So leadership should be committed. They should participate in decision making. They should monitor everything. So if the wheel is stopped, they should help push it, and they shouldn't be the one that stops the wheel, which happens all the time. Operations are the people in the UC, the task management of the UC. So in task management, we need to make sure that task is assigned to the correct person with the correct skills and the responsibilities. That person can also needs to understand the task, and he needs to discuss the objectives and outputs of that task, because he is the technical person for that task. It's important also to respect the deadlines for that task, because people times is not infinite. And in operations, people operate under a lot of environments. So the situation is constantly changing. The requirements are constantly changing. There's heavy information demand. There's rapid decision making. There's scrutiny from the media sometimes. There's lack of planning, lack of coordination, lack of integration. So I think you agree that all of this would affect the data collected and how it's collected and the speed of the collection and so on. Processes, you need to have good design in the SOPs, so the standard operation procedures. There should be designed really well and they should be improved upon. You need to have good documentation. The execution also of data recorded is important, so everyone should follow those SOPs when he collects data and so on. So these three factors are really important. You need to have a really good review of them before you move to the actual data and technology use. So in data, we have, of course, the data collected, how it's organized, how it's maintained, who accesses this data, and how it's delivered to the right people, how it's shared, and how it's used. And technology usually is aligned by the previous 4 points. It should facilitate all the work needed in the previous points. It should make it easier, faster. It should have some documentation and archiving options, and it should have better accessibility for and sharing. So what is the domains of information management? What should I do to have it? So you have, the first step is creating and capturing the information. And then you have to start organizing and categorizing the information. You need to govern the information, have automation of the processes of the in your information management, managing of the information lifecycle, and implementing of a software solution. So we'll talk about briefly of each of those steps. So in the first step is creating the and capturing data. Basically, we're gathering data from database surveillance, from event-based surveillance, from emails, like I said, calls, images, from all kinds of sources. You're capturing the data. But capturing the data is not enough. You need to go to the next step, which is organization and categorization of the information. You really need to make sure that data collected is organized correctly. And this is part of information architecture, which is a practice of deciding how to arrange the parts of something to be understandable. And this alone can be like 5 different webinars. It's a very wide topic. So you would want to have 4 areas in categorization your information. You need the taxonomy. So basically, categorization and classification of the data. You can think of a library in this example. So you would have books under the fiction section, the nonfiction, the history, the science, and all those different classification. And then you would, based on that taxonomy, you would have good navigation or bad navigation. So if you think about the library example, if you have good categorization, then you can navigate through the library easier. You'll find the books, fiction books, you'll find them in the right place quite easily. You would also want to collect metadata, which is data of the data, or basically description of the data collected. So you don't only collect the data, you also collect description of that data. You have to describe to the person or the system, what's this data talking about? What's this document? Who wrote it? And why is it written? What's inside it? What's the date of that document? The size, and so on. And finally, you need a search, some kind of search system using the metadata. So if you have good metadata, then you're able to search for the correct information. So for example, if you have 50 videos and each video is 5 hours, and they're talking about different topics, and you want to search a specific topic, you definitely don't have the time to open each video and watch hours and hours of content. You need to just search for the right keywords because you already have the metadata of those videos in your system. Governing of information, so the accountability and processes and roles. I'm not going to talk much about this point because next week we're actually going to expand on this, and Dr. Ramesh would have a presentation here. Next point is automating of your processes, information and the processes. So the first thing that you would want from an information system, for example, is to have your data collection automated. So it would be great if the surveillance data is pulled in automatically. So it reduces errors, it saves time, saves money, and so on. But it's not only the data that you want to automate, you also want to automate the processes. So all those, the task management, the approvals, every process, every decision that has been taken in your organization or EUC, it has to be saved in the system. This increases the speed and efficiency. There is now accountability because everyone sees what's happening. There's sustainability, and it also helps for the after action review when you review your response and what went wrong, what went right, and so on. So information and processes are important to be automated. Managing the information cycle, Dr. Ngoy in the previous presentation went into details into this topic. So basically, you have the data, and then you record the data using the SOPs that you have, and then you create the knowledge, and then you share this knowledge, and you store it for future reference. And final thoughts is, please don't gather for the information for the sake of gathering only. You really need to, people that gather the information, that do the data entry, need to understand why they are gathering this information. How is it used? You need to share this data with them and show them that, okay, you're using this data for this and that, because otherwise they will never, they will not complete the data collected. They will only fill the mandatory fields. They will never fill the optional fields because they don't understand how the data is being used. Don't think that technology alone will solve the issues. You really need to think about the strategy and your operations and so on. You need to simplify and modernize information management concepts and strategies. Always follow SOPs. For example, just the metadata example, for example. Make knowledge accessible and use knowledge to form informed decisions, of course. So thank you.
Thank you, Ali, for that wonderful presentation. Kindly encourage, if there are any questions and additional questions, please feel free to submit them into the Q&A box, and we will be sure to address them either here live or follow up on the Discord platform. We have a few questions that have come through for you that I think we'd like to address here. The first one that we have is if you could go into a little bit more detail about, information, what makes information good quality information for decision making. I know that you're going to get into that a bit more in a subsequent panel, but I was wondering if you might be able to give our participants a preview of that.
Yeah, so if I'm sorry, your voice was cutting. You were saying for what makes good information good for decision making or leadership, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So first of all, I think there should be a plan. What is the information that you need to collect? So that's part of the concept. So if the concept is correct, then it's always helpful for leadership. The quality of the information collected and the timeliness and completeness of this information is all dimension that is needed to have informed decision. Because if the information is not timely, then it's not helpful. If the information is incomplete, then it's not helpful. If the information is inaccurate, then it's not helpful. So you really need to work on those basic aspects so that leadership can make use of this information. It's easier said than done.
Great, thank you for that. We also had a question a little bit about timing. So with data, how do we also capture appropriately, the collection of timing of this data? Will that add additional context and situation to analyze? Can you describe that a bit further?
Yes, thank you for the question. Data that is 1 week old, especially in terms of emergencies, is not as useful as data that just happened right now or 5 hours ago or today. So timeliness is essential. An example, for example, recent, which is the COVID testing in the US, for example, and Bill Gates have complained about this multiple times, is people take COVID tests, but the results come 10 days later or 1 week later. And at that point, it's not useful. So the timeliness here is very important. Data should be timely, otherwise it's sometimes worthless. Yeah.
Great, thank you for that. And we have a question here as well about, for countries where data to collect and internet is difficult, whether it's lack of electricity, internet, satellite, et cetera, do you have any suggestions that you may be able to share with the participants on, other ways to capture data appropriately?
Yeah, so this topic will be in our 6th webinar, I think, in information systems. So yeah, it's of course a difficult dilemma. You really need some form of internet to communicate in this day and age. Thankfully, there is now more solutions that works offline, and whenever the net comes, it will sync up. So we all know DHIS2. There's also tools, survey tools like Kobo and Kobo, basically on mobile, where you log data and it will sync later on. Excel sheet is obviously the most common used tool, but we all know how cumbersome it can happen. Thankfully, there's other solutions, and we're going to share them in the 6th webinar.
Great, thank you. So that is the end of the questions that have been submitted for this session. Of course, this is the first of many in this series, so there will be lots of opportunity for additional questions. And we do encourage, if you still have any questions related to the material that has just been presented, please do feel free to share it in the Q&A box, and we will either try to address it towards the end or as well on the Discord platform to provide you more information.